Hello, it's Miss McCray. So I'm going to make a quick video to review the last two events that go along with Investigation 3. Before I go any further, though, I want to review a couple things. So in relation to the American and French revolutions, I wanted to kind of give you guys something to help you remember revolutions, and it's called symptoms of revolution. So when you hear the word symptoms, you think of a cold. And so there are four symptoms. There's the incubation stage, the symptomatic stage, the crisis stage, and the convalescence. So the incubation stage is going to be the stage where the sickness or the revolution kind of is just the first stage. Then there's the symptomatic, which is going to be the things that kind of lead up to the revolution. Then you have the crisis stage, which is actually the revolution itself. And then convalescence is the healing process or the aftermath of the revolution. Take a quick reminder to yourself and remind yourself that the Enlightenment is the lead cause of the American and French Revolution. Couple of things. When revolutions take place, they don't just come out of nowhere. There's usually some conditions that present itself before. Number one, people from all social classes are discontented, which means they're unhappy or there's something that's upsetting them. Number two, people feel restless and held down by unacceptable restrictions. So they feel like they have no freedoms, they're lacking liberty, and that could be in society, religion, the economy, or the government. So it could be any of these four components. The scholars, the thinkers, the intellectuals, they give up on the way their society operates. So people who are leaders in society, educated people, are going to give up and be angry or discontented with how society is operating at the time. Number four, the government does not respond to the needs of society. If you have like a large group of impoverished people, or they're living in poverty, then if the government's not taking care of them, the people are going to be angry that they're not taking care of the needs. Remember, government systems are established to take care of the people that they govern, that they rule. The government is also unable to get enough support from any group to save itself. If you have a majority of people, a large amount of people who are against the government can't survive. And then number six, the government loses control of its finances. Remember, people do not like to be hit in their wallet. And this can either cause the government to go bankrupt or they try heavily to tax people or tax people unfairly. So quick review on the American Revolution. You've already learned about it, but I wanted to give you a brief overview. In relation to the symptoms, the incubation stage of the American Revolution is the Stamp Act, where there was a tax placed on all paper goods, even playing cards. Remember that the colonists' chant was no taxation without representation. How can you tax us unjustly, unfairly, if we're not represented in a government? The symptomatic stage, some things that are going to get ready to set off the revolution are going to be the Boston Massacre. 5 colonists were shot and killed by British soldiers. Remember, we looked at that propaganda the other day in class. Boston Tea Party, the Intolerable Acts, and the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Remember, Thomas Jefferson drafted the Declaration of Independence and the Founding Fathers signed it. Official breakup letter with Britain. Previously they had sent a letter of grievances, like these are the things that we do not like that are going on in the colonies. Can we compromise? Can we work it out? King George III did not reply or respond the way they wanted to, so we had a breakup. The crisis stage is actually going to be the physical Revolutionary War. Lexington and Concord, first shot. They say the first shot heard around the world. Valley Forge was a turning point where the colonists, led by George Washington, started getting advantage because we were pretty terrible at first. And then Yorktown is where the British finally surrendered with the help of France. France came and assisted the colonists. And our convalescence for the American Revolution would be the Treaty of Paris. It ended the war. Everybody sat down and agreed to terms, and then we created the Articles of Confederation, which is the first attempt at a constitution. It was very weak, so we had to create a new constitution, and we currently have a government now that practices federalism, which is the unity of national government and state government. Now, when we talk about the French Revolution, a couple of things. There's going to be some social inequalities that cause the unrest in the incubation stage. There are 3 estates. 3 estates are social classes. The first is the clergy, the second was the noble, and the third was the middle class workers and peasants. Overall, they had a king of France, and so he was above all 3 of these estates, as well as, don't forget about the church. The third estate, which was the lower class estate, less money, paid over half of all the taxes in France. Enlightenment ideas had started to spread, and if you remember anything, Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu were all from France. And so the American Revolution had been successful. The Enlightenment ideas are spreading, and the French people of the Third Estate they have unrest. They're unhappy. King Louis XVI, very poor leader, he had put France in an economic crisis. Their economy was bankrupt, and the First and Second Estate were not taxed, and they didn't pay taxes. So most of the Third Estate paid all the taxes for France, but they were already poor, and also they did not have rights in the government. So they were being taxed, but not being allowed to vocalize for the government or in the government. Also, that the year that the revolution started, they had a poor harvest, which means most people in the Third Estate were paying taxes but could not even buy bread, or there was no food available for their family. When we talk about the symptomatic stage, the Estates General is called to meet, which is like their government, and the Third Estate is present and demands reform. Remember, the word reform means change. The First and Second Estate disagree and kick them out of the meeting. And so the Third Estate gets angry and they protest on the King's tennis court, but also they make their own national assembly or government. After being consistently ignored, they decide to storm the Bastille in France. So let me give you a quick background. King Louis XVI is scared of the Third Estate, very like on edge. The Third Estate feels equally nervous about him, so there's constantly this tick for tat of like, who's going to attack first, the king and his soldiers or the Third Estate? So the Third Estate goes ahead and makes a move. The Bastille is a fortress in France that has weapons, and so they wanted weapons, so they storm the Bastille. They take the weapons, and it's called Bastille Day now in France, and they cut the soldiers who were blocking the door their heads off at the Bastille and stormed around town with their heads on stakes. So really the Third Estate kind of drew a line in the sand in that moment and said, we're not playing around, we want a revolution. They sit down, the National Assembly writes the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, very similar to the Declaration of Independence. It's just written by some French people, and they create ultimately a constitutional monarchy, saying you monarch will have to follow our constitution, our document. Now, a couple of things happen in the crisis stage. Prussia exists during this time in Austria. They invade France, so France is struggling. The monarch is abolished, and it becomes a republic. You remember, a republic is where we pick our representation. The king and queen are executed with the guillotine, which means their heads were publicly cut off in front of the France, and also their children were killed. And then there's a reign of terror for over 40,000 people were killed. Robespierre is a person who rises and creates the Republic in France, and he is really big on killing and murdering people to kind of get them to conform, which is funny because ultimately Robespierre is executed as well. And so our convalescence for the French Revolution will be Napoleon Bonaparte forces a coup d'etat, which means in French forced transfer of power, where he takes over France and he creates new government and new constitution. And ultimately, though, Napoleon is not very successful, and he tries to create an empire, which causes a lot of warfare and strife. And he's ultimately exiled once, tries to come back to France, and then is exiled again. Remember, if you don't know what exiled means, it means kicked out. So, in my next video, it's going to be very quick. I'm going to talk to you about communism.